we are gathered here today. Thank you. Why we're gathered today here, to not celebrate. I don't think we're celebrating anything, but I think to recognize why this topic is an important topic. 1 year ago today, I and my colleagues, some of whom are joined with us in person and virtually, were making our final edits to a historic document that we worked very hard on for a whole year, which we titled the National Education Plan for Afghanistan. And literally on that day, the document was in its final edits for me to sign and send off to the president for a final approval. 1 year ago today, I had endured the brutal political and gender attacks of assuming a leadership role as a woman of one of the largest civil public institution, the Ministry of Education, and coming and taking that leadership role as a non-political actor in a very political Afghanistan was no easy task. 1 year ago today, my leadership team and I lost the opportunity to continue our work on the robust reform agenda that we had created so passionately, where we were calling for a complete overhaul of the system of education of Afghanistan, and a reform that proposed creating an ecosystem of education where we looked at all of the aspects that revolved around education in Afghanistan, and taking all of that knowledge, expertise, experience, and the reality of Afghanistan into our mind to make the strategic steps forward. This conference is, in essence, a continuation of our reform agenda, adjusted, of course, to the new reality of Afghanistan now. This mission is personal to me because I was once upon a time a girl in grade 3 when we were refugees in Pakistan. And the forefathers or the predecessors of the Taliban, at that time we called them Mujahideen, and they were supported by US funds, had the right or gave themselves the right to pull me and my sister out of school because they did not think it was necessary for a girl to be educated. Had my parents not made the bold decision of coming to the US, as many families have today, to give the opportunity of education to their girls, that same little girl would not have become the Minister of Education of Afghanistan. So today, as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister of Afghanistan, my own personal experience of what I've gone through and witnessing the new policy against stopping the millions of girls to continue their education is not just a topic of conversation or a topic of policy or a topic of donor funding, implementer agencies wanting to provide education services to a very remote and a very devastated society, but it is a personal attack on me and my girls of Afghanistan. Today, as we organized 1 year later, while I had the luxury of living in a relatively peaceful society of America, after 1 year of the fall of Afghanistan, I am left with more questions than answers. And the purpose of this gathering of bringing Afghan and international experts on education was to take a deep dive into the notion of education in Afghanistan. And until and unless we understand the roots, the current reality, we will not be able to create a future in the education sector for Afghanistan. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first speaker, presenter, my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Ghulam Omar Kargha, who I have to say is not only a qualified international education expert, but one of the few Afghans, I still call you a full Afghan, even though you're Afghan American, who has not only served and gotten the qualifications in this field, but he has the privilege of over 20 years of ground experience in Afghanistan, working at the education sector, and most importantly for me personally, serving as my senior advisor in the time that I served as Minister of Education. So thank you, Omar, again for your service, and please enlighten us with your knowledge. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for that introduction. Those were kind words. I hope that I deserve some of it. Thank you to Dean Kagram and the rest of the colleagues that are here. Today, as Minister Hamidi mentioned, is a turning point in Afghanistan, but it's not the first turning point. It's one of the many turning points that the country has faced. And I have the difficult task to give you a very quick overview of the educational history and challenges and talk about some opportunities for Afghanistan, and as Dean Kagram mentioned, to draw some lessons from Afghanistan for other fragile and conflict-affected states. So I'm going to go through some history, some of the tensions that have existed, and finish off with some suggestions. Do I have control of these slides? Yes, I do. So, as you know, the current situation has been highlighted. Today, while I was driving here, NPR, BBC, everybody was talking about the fact that education and secondary schools for girls remain closed after a year. The roots of this goes back to a lot of historical, political conflicts that have affected the society. And I'm going to actually just talk about the complexity of the situation, how the local and the global come together, and talk about some of the redesigning education for our discussions. Number one, education is a very, very complex social enterprise. There are two sides to education. One is what happens in the classroom, the teaching strategies, the skill, the pedagogy, the curriculum. The other is how education comes to be formed in a society. There are historical, religious, and political and cultural forces that set the stage for what kind of an educational program a country institutes, or what kind of an educational program a country adopts. And the adoption is the case for modern schooling for a lot of the nations outside of the West. I found these two pictures. The first one is the Gawar Shah Madrasa in Herat, and the second one is the Habibia High School. I'll get into both of them a little bit later on. So education and modern schooling have to be differentiated a little bit, because education has a very deep root in the region in Afghanistan. In 224 Common Era, the Sasana dynasty had these institutions that were called Dabiristan. And historically, they're probably the first civil servant programs that existed anywhere in the world. The curriculum was vast. They taught from literacy to cooking to horseback riding to writing manuscripts for the court. So the root is very strong. After Islam came into Afghanistan, 642 to 1868, that's a long time. The educational system in the country was all based on Islamic educational systems, the halaqas, the masjids, and the madrasas, which you all know of. Afghanistan, again, being at the center of a lot of historical happenings, nobody really knows where the first madrasa originated, but there are historical evidence. Makdisi has written about this, that the first madrasas actually started in Afghanistan and then went to Baghdad later, drawing upon the Dabiristan model. The madrasas had, there was a lot of interesting facts about the madrasas. One, the curriculum was very diverse. There were astronomy, mathematics, science, theology, philosophy, all of those things existed in madrasa systems. Herat had 5 madrasas that were medical madrasas, training people to become doctors. So the concept of madrasas that we have now is very different than what it used to be. Another interesting fact, which goes back to that picture of Gawarshad Begum's madrasa, the majority of the madrasas were funded through what's called awqaf, endowments. And the majority of the endowments came from women. And Dr. Nadawi in Oxford has documented that there were approximately 8,000 scholars, female scholars, that were teaching in madrasas across the Muslim world. And they were teaching to both male and female students. So I point this out because 1868, 1700 is when the colonization took place. So the political forces changed. The madrasas, they started becoming closed off because there were political shifts in the environment, and the strength of the Muslim empire declined. So they saw modern schooling, which started about 1840-ish as a new institution. They saw that as a mechanism of modernization to change society. So I think it's very important to keep a historical perspective on what that means for our current challenges that we have. Much like a lot of the rest of the world, the first modern schools, actually the first one didn't start in 1903. It started around 1868 by Amir Sher Ali Khan. It was called the Maktab Harbi and Maktab Shahi, I think. These were specific schools designed to train military people and the royal families. The first kind of official school was that picture that I showed you earlier, Habibia, 1903. This school was established in Kabul. There's another aspect of history that I think is important to understand. This was at the time where India and Pakistan were going through a lot of changes as well. And in India, a new movement called the Deobandi movement and the Brehlawi movement and the Aligarh University started in India. madrasas in Afghanistan became affiliated with a lot of the Deobandi schools, teachings and curriculum, which is another very interesting part of history about education. And the Habibia school got connected to Aligarh University. The principal was from India, a lot of the teachers were from India, and this began this two dual systems of a modern schooling system and the madrasas, which saw each other as competition. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, and please keep me honest to my time. Then we had several phases that were a continuous conflict within the educational system. We had radical modernization between 1919 to 1928 by Amanullah Khan, which I'm not going to go into the history of that. People saw that as an attack on a lot of the institutions, traditional institutions of the country. So there was a civil war in 1929 directly connected to education, not partly, not fully. Habibullah Kalakani took over, and then the civil war, that period kind of resembles the Taliban period in a lot of ways. Then 1930 to 1978 was sort of this somewhat stable time, gradual modernization, expansion of schools, but then there was this USSR invasion of Afghanistan. Schooling started to expand drastically, 1.2 million people, 50% girls. At the same time, the resistance in Pakistan and Iran were preparing other schools that Rangina mentioned. And then we had another civil war, 1992, Taliban 1.0. Then we had the period of 2001 to 2021, exponential growth in schools, but schools were connected to counterinsurgency, and we have a lot of colleagues that have a lot of experience in Afghanistan during that time. And we ended up in August 15th last year, where we are at right now. So this kind of gives you a contextualization of where we are with this whole dialogue about schooling. How do we go forward? Number one, to have a serious dialogue, which is what we're trying to do. To start thinking about a redesign where we're not pitting these two forces, the madrasas and the schools, against each other, but working towards it. And doing a comprehensive system redesign. This is what we were trying to do last year until this day. And I reached my last slide. So it's a tangled web. And what we have to do, there's a lot of wisdom in old sayings. There's a saying in Dari that if you want to solve a very complex problem, you have to find the beginning of the thread. Sare nakha paida kardan is we have to find the thread, and the thread is dialogue and honest dialogue, and that's what we're hoping to do today. So that was a very quick overview of about 2,000 years of educational history. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karga. I know we can give you hours to talk about this. May I ask Mr. Emaldos to please join us in person? And then we have 4 panelists who are not able to be with us. We have Dr. Ataullah Wahidyar, who's currently, should I say the country? For security reasons, I will not mention where he is, but he is close to Afghanistan. We have Ms. Paivan Saidali, who is actually sitting in Kabul, joining us from Kabul. We have Ms. Nadima Sahar, who is actually in Virginia, but was unable to meet us in person last minute. And then Mr. Mohammad Tahir Ismat, who's education head for the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan. And Mr. Emal Dost, fortunately, is able to be with us here today. So I think I have to take this.
I think we have these.
We speak into that, but then what about the audience? I think we have to use this
Okay.
mic. So I'm going to be your moderator, and our first panel's title is Understanding the Local Context, Challenges, and Opportunities that are ahead of us. Our 5 distinguished panelists not only have extensive experience and knowledge of the local context, but are actively involved in mechanisms and ways in which education can be addressed, taking into consideration the local context. I'm not going to waste our time with reading the beautiful, extensive, and very accomplished biographies of each and every panelist of ours. We will make them available after the program to all of you in case you want to contact them. So I will jump right into our panelists, our conversation, our dialogue, and ask Dr. Ataullah Wahidyar to begin by talking to us the challenges of doing work in Afghanistan currently from a local perspective, knowing all of your great experience and being involved with the education ministry for close to 20 years. Give us a real picture of what you're sensing on the ground.
Minister Rangina, thank you very much, and thank you all colleagues for having me. First of all, my apologies for having all these connection issues. I'm just switching the equipments, the machines in order to be able to stay connected. So my quick apologies on that one. I think we are talking on a very important subject at a very critical time about education in Afghanistan, and we are also trying to touch the educational planning in uncertain environments. I am told that for a talkative person like me with all his life being in education, I am told that I have 5 minutes to round up, which I will try to. Before I go to what is currently going on, let me quickly tell you 2 quick peculiarities of the context we are talking about. Peculiarity number 1, we need to remember that Afghanistan is not an Islamic society. Afghanistan is a cultural society of Muslims. What it means is that what dominates the day-to-day interactions of people in that country is the prevailing culture, not Islam. So let's not confuse that. The second peculiarity of the context is that Afghanistan is a visual society, which means a very good atheist with a very nice beard and a good turban will always be welcome to offer prayers as compared to a practicing mullah without having a beard or naked head. So that society goes by more by the visuals than the intellect. So taking those 2 peculiarities which have a lot of impact on education, and I remember in my very short time in the Ministry of Education, about 14 years, I saw a minister in Ministry of Education kicking out people from their offices just because they were not wearing pant and shirt. And now I see another minister in very position in kicking out people who are wearing pant and shirt. So it's all about the visuals that comes into play in education. I will quickly touch upon the barriers. I think most of us know. I'm just referring to. We have the key barrier we have is, I call it the perceptual barrier. I think Karga has touched upon this. Unfortunately, in some of the areas in Afghanistan, modern schooling is considered being a foreign agenda, and it's being considered something in contradiction with the prevailing culture in Islam. So this is why there is this wrong perceptual barrier that is challenging expanding education opportunities and also creating the dilemma that we face today. Physical barriers, I think we have many scholars have talked about. We have been facing it in Afghanistan for years. Financial barriers, education have never been on the top of the agenda of any political setup. Cultural barriers, definitely, I have touched upon earlier. In some of the culturally sensitive, I don't call it conservative societies, I just call them culturally sensitive societies, because they believe that by adding something new into their prevailing culture, it will destroy what they have in hand, which they hold very dear. And we also have political barrier, and I know historically education platform have been heavily used for political agendas. If you look at least the last 40, 50 years of the history of Afghanistan. So those are the quick barriers that I just wanted to refresh in everybody's mind. I'm coming to the challenges that we face. I think the greatest challenge everybody knows is that of girls' education, but everybody also need to keep in mind that we are also facing a silent challenge of female teachers. As many of you know, female teachers, like in Kabul city alone, I think we had over 90% of our teachers were female. Out of the 32,000 in total, 28,000 were female. So in this whole discussion of separating male and female, which is still not very much defined, because throughout the history of Afghanistan, there was no co-education at schooling. But many female teachers who were teaching in boys' schools have been barred from going to school, and they have been replaced by male teachers, which is going to create this entire challenge of losing the female teachers in education system at large. We are also losing the academic cadre in Afghanistan. So those of our people who have experience in education are unfortunately leaving the positions, and those positions are being replaced by non-technical people, which is going to be a huge challenge for education to come. An important note in regard to international community, I think we have been partnering with international community in our education endeavor. And currently, with whatever support is going forward to Afghanistan, international community is not being able to create any sphere of influence or any kind of insight into what is going on inside the education system. Financing is another big barrier that I think many of us know of. There is only a few mechanisms, one or maximum two mechanisms available to go finances through. And those mechanisms are not being able to be up to the mark in order to be able to deliver the required assistance within education system to the children in need. I'm trying to come to the end of my conversation. I'm hoping that some of these discussions will come up during questions as well. Opportunity. The biggest opportunity we have, remember, is that we have an agreed content of education, and which everybody agrees to, and that is still being delivered in schools all over Afghanistan, which is I think a great achievement. Another opportunity we have is there are voices within the current movement in support of girls' education, and there is very small minority, probably more influential or maybe in position of power, who is not in support of girls' education. So there isn't this opportunity of partnering with the supportive voices, strengthening those voices in order to be able to overcome the minority voice that is opposing girls' education. I believe that there is this opportunity for the local voices to come forward. I think many Afghans needs to come forward, because I always say that, look, education is not President Biden's issue. Education is Afghans' agenda. It's Mia Khan's agenda. I'm sure you have heard of this man Mia Khan in Paktika province, who used to take his daughters on a bike every day, 16 kilometers to study. So education for girls is not a foreign agenda. This is not the Western headquarters agenda. This is the agenda of people of Afghanistan, in the girls and children of Afghanistan. So the local voices, I call on all Afghans to come forward and make this as their own agenda and present it as the need of the people of Afghanistan, rather than letting it into the hand of the big capitals and strengthening this perception that educating a girl is the agenda of a foreign capital. So with those quick notes, I think I will shut up, and then I will let other colleagues speak, and then we'll come to the next stage of the conversation if asked to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. You actually spoke less than 10 minutes, so I was very generous with you. Let us turn over to Ms. Paivan Saidali, who is actually in Kabul, to hear from you. What are you hearing and what are you seeing, Paivan?
Hello, dear friends, former colleagues, critical voices in education, and the audience members who are in some way, shape, or form part of this conversation. I think I'll pick up on a few points that Dr. Wahid Yar mentioned and try to leave more for the question and answer period, and to my other colleagues who are on the ground or otherwise experienced. I think that Dr. Wahid Yar is absolutely right and right on when he says that education shouldn't be, and for most isn't, a political agenda or a Western agenda. I think what we see very strongly on the ground is an overwhelming discontent with the current status quo of girls being barred from secondary school. And what we saw in the years, especially the past 5, 6, 7 years, as the demand for education snowballed, we have seen in almost every village survey that as long as there is access to safe, close schooling, parents will delay marriage and delay labor and other aspects to keep their kids in school, both girls and boys. This is especially critical for, I feel a bit of Dr. Saab, Wahid Yar Saab, could you please mute her? Thank you. I think this is one of the critical aspects to pay attention to now. What we are seeing is local mobilization. We had a period of time where certainly most secondary girls' schools were closed. But what we have seen is where teachers are currently lobbying, where community councils are lobbying, where governors' offices are being negotiated with, secondary schools for girls are open. And they're opening more and more frequently throughout the country. Of course, there can be places I've gone in conservative provinces where I have seen with my own eyes that the schools are open. I have heard from the provincial education director that they're committed to girls' schools and will keep them open, but they don't want media to come see this. They don't want this to be publicized. So this idea of a unity and the public somehow making a visible stance is a very different one from the practical actions that are already happening. And it's the same to be said for much of the international community. There is significant work happening. We have about 240 million released for education and actively being rolled out through a variety of programs, assessments happening. We have commitments that include monitoring for curriculum changes and gender equity. But there is, of course, a reluctance to discuss this overtly because education has become so political. And Dr. Wahid Yar, you're so right to say that it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Politicizing education has incredibly tangible and quick effects. It doesn't matter I mean, of course it does matter. We'll see girls in school probably, you know, and a much, or allowed to go to school at some point in the next year. It's unlikely that this closure will continue. But every day that girls are not in school, with poverty at over 97% in the country, it means that more parents are selling their daughters for a bride price younger and younger. It's a typical marriage custom. But when we saw that if there was a ninth grade or a seventh grade or an eighth grade, parents would delay those 1, 2, 3 years. And for a girl, getting pregnant at the age of 12 or 13 is very different from getting pregnant at the age of 16 or 17. It is a world of difference.
Thank you, Ms. Paiwand. I would love to have you continue, but let's move on to the other panelists, and then, of course, we will call on your expertise later on. Thank you so much for your intervention. Mr. Ismat, if you can tell us, as Ms. Paiwand rightfully says, that there's a lot of actors on the ground still working and actively engaged in the education sector. And I know, we all know that the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan has been engaged in the education sector for a very long time. What is the organization engaged with right now? What are some of the challenges that your organization is facing, and where do you see some opportunities?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Colleagues, hope you are hearing me well.
We can hear you fine. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sib. Yes, you are right. Swedish Committee has been working in the education sector since decades. Especially, we are engaged with providing access to education areas. Mainly girls of the country. Swedish Committee is active in east of the country, northeast, north, and region of the country. There are 100,000 children going to the school, established by Swedish Committee, where 6% are girls.
Mr. Ismat, it is very, very difficult to hear you. Mr. Ismat, perhaps if we can come back to you. Maybe turn off the video so that your voice alone might not require too much bandwidth.
Is it better now?
Yes, please.
Okay. So currently, Swedish Committee is providing access to education to more than 100,000 children in the remote areas because of the recent study done by UNICEF that is 4 million children out of school in the country. So this is why our focus is on providing access to education. Unfortunately, seeing that as of this change, we have seen that more girls are coming to schools in the primary schools classes, and more women candidates are appearing to take the role as women teachers. We have got 3% increase in women teachers, and got around 4% increase in girl students in grade 1 to 6. While our school up to grade 12, girls are continuing their education. This is because of the active and engagement of the local communities and the education community and the influence of the local schools. So our schools are continuing education even at secondary level. Also, local authorities expect the influence of boards and education of their girls. The main challenges that we see currently is that the current ban on secondary education for girls, which is well known to everyone. But even if the ministry allow all girls to go to schools, are our schools able to welcome these girls? There is challenge of lack or insufficient girl-specific facilities inside schools. There are no appropriate wash facilities. There are no appropriate washrooms and drinking water facilities. There are no court walls. There are no improved classrooms inside the schools. More than 50% of the schools are not having school buildings. So even if there is no ban, even schools are not welcoming the girls in this current conditions. And on top of everything, it is lack of the women qualified teachers in schools. So for having more women qualified teachers, we recommend that the education to be digitized. Dr. Wahidiyat also referred to, from one side, government is politicizing the education. They are imposing their policies. From the other side, international donors, they are politicizing the education. And we are recommending that we need to train hub schools. We have hired teachers are the hub schools. We have the government. We have to establish a monitoring mechanism for hub schools, which is lacking today. The government staffs on the provincial level as well as on the district level are lacking financial resources, and they're also unprofessional of education. To make them professional of education, to train them, to provide them with financial resources, they need financial support, which is lacking today. So this is why we are recommending that to depoliticize the education in terms of working with this current regime, even if it is supporting the education or not supporting, but we have to work with it.
Thank you, Mr. Ismat. Very important points you've raised, and I'm sure we will come back to those great points. Speaking of access, Mr. Emal Dost, you are working in the edtech industry here in America and have had lots of experience working with Afghanistan through models that you've created. What can you tell us that one of the solutions that is on everybody's mouth today is using technology as a tool to get access to education for the millions of girls who are now banned from attending school? Please share with us your knowledge in that sector. Yes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you guys. So my background, as you mentioned, has been more in ed tech globally, more so on the higher ed side than K through 12. But in general, just globally, the pandemic has accelerated just the use of online education as well as the acceptance. So it's really taught us a lot, not just in Afghanistan or conflict countries, but just globally in general, even in the United States. As you mentioned, that the big pro is access. It's reaching individuals that otherwise wouldn't be able to be reached with still quality education. My main role in terms of just the exposure to education in Afghanistan is through being a board member of the American University of Afghanistan. So the example there for online education, even though we're not present in country, people are dispersed, and now we're going to have a base in Qatar. While we're working on the students that are leaving Afghanistan, the important thing for us is what about the ones in country? So we've actually this summer had a boot camp for STEM that the girls are participating in. So there's a lot of thirst for this kind of education. And then this fall, we're going to actually continuing the education. So we're expecting 300 students this fall in country, of which 200 are women. So we want to continue with that. There are obviously challenges to online education that include, fatigue and we've heard of the Zoom fatigues but there's different formats. I mean, today we are doing the online with our existing professors, but there's different formats. There's different technologies that are just emerging now. So it's not just Zoom. There's one recently came out with the founder of Blackboard called Class, or another one called Engagely, where they're trying to replicate the in-classroom experience through projects, through being together versus just having the Zoom lectures. I think the ed-tech component is one that's been a challenge. I think the financing is the other one, not eventually how to pay for it, but at least for our students, they're being funded at least today by still USAID, thankfully, and State Department and others while we're doing other fundraising. But the ones initially were able to just focus on school, But now, given the situation in Afghanistan, they're also working while trying to go to school. So that's been a big challenge. And the third one, of course, has been connectivity, which again is not only in Afghanistan, it's even in rural mid-America, there's connectivity issues. People think here everybody has the internet, but there's many parts that they don't. So trying to address a lot of that, and then through the online in general, what's causing for, again, globally is because you don't have that sense of community, it's the mental health issues. So trying to provide that in what we call, at least in the US now, this wraparound service. So if you have online education, there's different things along with that, whether it's mentors, whether it's a community. I think those are all very important. And having strong offline capability, especially in a place like Afghanistan, where you initially have the connectivity. But there are some examples that I've read about, at least through, I think it's Learn and others in country, where it is digital, but then they've got very strong offline connectivity, which is very important. And the last point on that, to address some of those challenges also is content. The content has to be engaging. And again, this is a global trend. If you watch a movie and you have bad characters, you're just going to stop the movie. It shouldn't be different with online education. So there has been this shift of just making more and more engaging content. And I think that's very important to keep people engaged in that regard. Maybe I'll stop there just for timing.
Thank you. And you've actually touched on a very important topic that I hope we can discuss in a little bit after Ms. Nadima talks. Ms. Nadima Sahar, you were the General Director for TVET in Afghanistan. And although I know you're no longer in Afghanistan, but we would love to hear your perspective and your experience in the technical vocational education opportunities that exist in Afghanistan, particularly because a country that is financially devastated, one of the main reasons why many people invest in sending their children to become educated is not for the aspiration of, raising great scholars. It is to get a job, to, bring income. Where do you see the industry that you are leading? What are the challenges that particular industry is facing right now from the connections that you have on the ground still?
Thank you, Rangina Chan, and my apologies for not being to attend today's session in person. Today is a rather difficult day for all of us. It marks the 1-year anniversary of the collapse of Afghanistan, exactly 1 year after we carried our homes in our bags. Bags that were brimming with sorrow and lost dreams, grief and suffering, and bags that were too small to carry our homeland or our grieving hearts. I chose not to speak during the past year. It was a conscious decision because mainly, much like many other Afghan, I have had difficulty coming into terms and reconciling with the new reality in Afghanistan. But here I am speaking today, hoping that today's conversation would hopefully serve as pointers on the next steps for the education sector in Afghanistan. In the interest of time, Rangina Chan, I'll focus on the technical and vocational education in Afghanistan, specifically focusing on the challenges that it faces right now. I think so often when we talk about Afghanistan and its assets, we refer to its strategic location, to its 3 trillion minerals underground, and to many other ones. But I think Afghanistan's greatest asset is neither its strategic location nor its minerals, neither anything else. It's the youth on the ground, the Afghan youth and their untapped potential. And I'm grateful to have had the privilege of leading an entity called the Technical and Vocational Education and Training Authority of Afghanistan that tapped into that potential and nurtured it. So through TVET, we were providing skills development trainings in 12 priority sectors to over 68,000 students across 34 provinces and 255 districts. In terms of the challenges facing the sector, I will briefly touch upon 4 main challenges. Again, this by no means is an exhaustive list, but more of my own reflections having worked in the sector. I think the first challenge is just reflecting back on what Ms. Saeed Ali said, that yes, there is a lot happening in the country right now, but unfortunately, with limited coordination and collaboration among the key stakeholders, this does lead to duplication of efforts in some area and then also lack of access in others. Second problem, very much related to the first one. The second challenge is not being able to tailor the programs to the local context. I think one of the main challenges we have had in the past in Afghanistan, and that keeps repeating itself again, is delivering foreign solutions to local problems. I think for any organization wanting to work in the education sector in Afghanistan, they have to know the local context and tailor their programs accordingly. Third problem, echoing back what Wahid Yarsahib said, the education sector has been heavily aid dependent. So I think the future of the education sector will depend on Afghanistan's ability to reconcile the priorities of the many competing factions and interests facing the country right now. So from widespread poverty to unemployment to many others, it's all a matter of prioritization right now. Just to give you an example, the current population of Afghanistan, it is one of the youngest in the country, with 70% of the population being younger than 30 years. So I think with that, the population growth rate, assuming a population growth rate of 2.5%, this implies that the labor force will be growing almost 500,000 persons per year, or almost 40,000 persons per month. Just looking at the current labor market, it does not have the capacity to absorb them. So this is another challenge. And then finally, all of these challenges are also complicated by the institutional challenges facing the sector. So from inadequate infrastructure to insufficient personnel to deliver trainings, lack of access to demand-driven trainings or trainings that are competency-based and responsive to sector requirements are some of the key issues facing the sector right now. In terms of the way forward, I know that I have used my time, so I'll respond to that later during the Q&A section.
Thank you, Ms. Sahar. Very important points you've raised. I know that I'd shared other questions with all the panelists, but I think I'm going to tweak my question. Hearing all of you talk about the challenges and the complexity that exists in Afghanistan, particularly in the education sector, if you had the magic wand today to fix one aspect of the challenges that you've all shared, what would be that one challenge that you can fix, knowing that it's feasible? I don't want to hear dreams, because I think many of us Afghans are used to hearing dreams. I wish it was like that. It could be like that. But I want, from your practical experiences, what is the one thing that you know that you can recommend and that it is feasible to bring that change? Ms. Sahar, if we may begin with you, please.
Thank you, Rangina John. Just going back to the 4 points that I raised, again, if I had a magic wand, not that I would need one. I think just going back to these 4 problems, it's not a matter of resources, more a matter of prioritization and will. All 4 could be addressed, assuming that there is that political will on the de facto government's part. I think the 4th one would be a key one for me, addressing the institutional barriers right now, because aid coordination, implementation, all of those aspects are heavily dependent on this. So making sure that the trainings you deliver are demand-driven and address the existing gap in the labor market, ensuring that you have the infrastructure to deliver this, in terms of teachers, in terms of the content, in terms of the technology, and then also lastly, access. So the 4th one would be the one that I would push for or advocate for.
Thank you. Mr. Ismat, what is the one recommendation you would recommend?
Yes, Dr. Seb. We are mainly working with the CBA, means community-based education, and there we see the challenges that when we are sending these children to the hub schools, to the government schools, there is lack of qualified teachers, and especially of women teachers. While currently there are candidates available within the main cities, which need to be deployed to the rural area. So what I suggest is that if the donors invest in this and they work with the current authorities, they allocate especially women qualified teachers to the hub schools in rural areas, this will definitely decrease the dropout rate among the girls and increase their retention inside the school. And that can bring a change to the future. So what I recommend is that please do not, the donors should not think about who is ruling the country, but they should invest for the future of this generation. So if they invest in hub schools, that will really bring in more children, especially girls, to schools, and they will enlighten their future.
Thank you. Ms. Said Ali, if you can give us one recommendation, what would that be from your experience?
Yes, but Ms. Saha gave you 4. So if you allow me 2, I will be very
okay,
happy.
please go ahead.
What I'll be very, very quick with, and that's money. No country in the world has ever improved their education structure wherever they were without a proper investment, and few countries have actually properly invested. Indonesia is one example. It took about 40% of their national budget, and they made that intentional choice. Afghanistan's Ministry of Education, the education budget was never sufficiently funded, and we're looking at a 50% shortfall now. But the thing that I will say, where again with Ms. Sahar, we don't need a magic wand for this. Teachers are and have been always and will be the center of the solution to education. They are advocates, they are present, they are engaged, they know their communities. And what we have in Afghanistan is a very active central teachers elected council, teachers elected councils in every province and in almost every district. I went to one in Paktika province, there was not a single female teacher. And I said, why don't you guys have female teachers in this teachers elected council? We just never had it. Are you opposed to it? No. Do you think, but they would need to be separated? Can you manage that if you had, the capacity to organize? Yes. In Paktika, as they say, because of the teachers elected council, schools never closed. Not from grade 1 to grade 9, not for girls or boys. Now, there is no school above grade 9 in Paktika province, but it was the teachers union that kept them open. So I would say in the absence of being able to coordinate all these massive mechanisms, the political will, figure out how to fund the de facto authority in a way that's not funding the de facto authority, I would put my money in teachers elected councils and watch that trickle out into incredible advocacy on all levels of education categories.
Thank you. Important, very important points. Mr. Emaldost, what do you recommend?
One is you can pay teachers the same as government people, so everybody wants to become a teacher, but I know that's not practical, but that's how you get really good teachers. I think regardless of who's in charge, whether it's previous government, new government, current one, just investing a lot in connectivity and hybrid solutions would be my recommendation. And I think in today's environment, just anybody else providing education, I think people just need to be flexible on both sides. I think after having some red lines, of course, but things like if men and women, don't expect them to be in the same classroom in this environment. And if that is a key negotiating item, I almost want to say don't bother, because that's not going to happen, because there's many countries like Saudi and other places where there's very limited co-ed in the classroom. You can still have it within the same school separated, but the point is just have flexibility on both sides, including I think on the content side, where it's okay to have some of the Islamic one and not be afraid of that, but then have a mix of critical thinking, and then a lot of the courses like STEM that provide economic empowerment. So these students, to your point earlier, the whole thing is not just to have a degree, but to be able to then work after and have an actual job. So this mix of liberal arts with STEM and other types of vocational courses, I think is very important. And again, a trend, not just in Afghanistan potentially, or recommendation, but just a trend globally that's happening. So.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Saboidyar, I've purposely kept you to the end because I know you're gonna probably go over time, but we do ask you to please stick to the time. Your recommendation.
Okay. I have a dilemma, and the dilemma I have is that when I was a child, this was once in my life that I hated Russians, and still we as a nation are paying the price of all what we are going through. So I have decided not to hate anybody. And the dilemma I'm having is that everybody is encouraging me that I should hate those people governing Afghanistan these days, and I shouldn't be speaking any positive about them. Otherwise, I am going to be considered like whatever. So that is my dilemma. On one side, I have my old Jamhuriyat friends who are encouraging me to be anti somebody, and then there is this entire internal intention of loving my own killer. So I will go from this perspective of loving my own killer. If I have the opportunity to give one advice, I think my advice would be, we know that Afghanistan is currently ruled by the most conservative mindsets of the pockets of that society. My recommendation would be that let's partner with the supportive voices within that most conservative layer of the movement. I think it is going to give us 3 quick results. Number one, it is going to Islamize modern education, because those people have somehow convinced parts of the society that we are representing the true Islam. So if you have those claimers of the true Islam supporting modern education, I think it will largely contribute to Islamizing the modern education, which Karga was referring to. 2, it is going to decrease the gap between madrasa and school, because you are actually pushing the madrasa holders to deliver modern education. And I think 3rd, it is going to increase the ownership among the most conservative mindsets of Afghanistan. I believe that is an opportunity that I'm not hoping that we will have for a long time, because many of us in Afghanistan don't have the luxury of ruling that country for more than a couple of years. So this is an opportunity of a time, and I think if we as an educationist can grab it and take our enmity in whatever happened to one side, it is going to contribute to the education agenda in the years to come.
Thank you, Dr. Saib. We're actually on track and on time. It is about 10:15, and we have actually about 10 more minutes to ask questions from the audience. So what we will do, to be fair, is we will take one question from the audience who's here first, and then one from the online attendees. And if there's more time for additional, we will add. So does anybody have any question for panelists in this room? Yes, and you will have to speak into the mic.
Thank you so much. I think this is really important information here. My name is Palwasha Kakar. I'm currently the director of the Religion and Inclusive Societies team at USIP, where we do have online global campuses, and we have Afghans joining those online global campuses in droves. So on our online courses, it's every day I see new people joining. So it's very interesting to see that hybrid. And to your point, Mirza, how important that is. What I wanted to ask about, I was really interested in hearing more from Ms. Said Ali on the elected teachers councils, because I think this is a very important point in terms of investment, and I'd like to hear more about that. We have heard a lot about girls' schools negotiated locally by the community. It's something we're hopeful for in terms of giving more information locally to put that kind of pressure. It's something we're trying to work on with our working group at USIP, but I'd love to hear more about some of those mechanisms and how they've worked, if we do have some examples of how those mechanisms have worked more clearly, so we can figure out how to do that better. So I'd like to hear more on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will quickly respond, and I'm so excited to hear about the digital increased participation as well at your level. But then, I will respond, but I'll pass it to Ismat, because the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, I don't know if others know, it's the largest NGO in the country, around 7,000 employees, many of them teachers. Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, along with West Canada, originally about 10 years ago, really started to push the teachers union. And this is important because in terms of putting funding in there, funding that goes to NGOs or through intermediate entities through the teachers union is one avenue that until we sort out how we can support education, despite sanctions towards the government, with the exception of humanitarian education, we do have to find these funding mechanisms as well, which I think is the subject of the next panel. But so the teachers union became finally national in 2015, but it started districts and provinces and grew that way. However, and we have the azan here now. However, if you go to some teachers unions, you'll see, and this is no criticism, Ismat said, that some of them have computers, but no electricity, no internet. So they cannot organize. They're there, they're present, they have membership, and they need like what, every district, $2,000-3,000 a month will enable them to live as teachers and to mobilize. So I would say it's very simple. I see Education International is here. I would look into this and find the mechanisms to support. Now, when you speak to teachers elected councils, they don't also have access to the international community outside of their intermediaries, such as the Swedish Committee. The teachers in the districts don't speak English. They don't have access to donor applications. So it's on us to reach out to them, I would say, through local intermediaries. And Swedish Committee is a great example. May I please pass to Mr. Ismat?
Yes, Pawan Saidali, yes, thank you very much. Actually, currently, the Teachers Elected Council has been connected to the Teachers Union in Sweden. Also, it has been connected to the Teachers Union and the SAARC countries level. It is getting a grant from Swedish Committee, and we are working with them to get enabled to get grants from other donors. And I agree with you that this is representing teachers of 30 out of 34 provinces in the country. Means they have expanded their coverage. However, their working permission from from the government is valid until end of the current solar year. We're a bit concerned about their future because the DFAs, the de facto authorities, have closed the department in the Ministry of Justice, which has been issuing working licenses to the civil society organizations. So that is the area we will look into. But currently, Teachers Elected Council is working very well. It is getting grants and it's implementing projects. Yes, I agree with you. In some districts, their offices are not well equipped. If they're equipped, they do not have electricity. And this is one of the limitation for Swedish Committee because we are to reach to more children while having the budget ceiling for the years. So when you keep the budget ceiling from the main donors and you have to reach to more children, you have to limitize your resources to some areas of work, which are very important. I agree with you. If there are more donors, if there's more investment, Teachers Elected Council can work better for improving quality of the education and for raising voice of the teachers, which is the main workforce for education.
Thank you, Mr. Saidali, Ms. Saidali and Mr. Ismat. Well, I think we do have a question online.
Yes, you have Samita Gar from Education International that would like to speak, so I'm gonna.
Okay, please.
Go ahead, Samita.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, thank you ever so much. I didn't really have a question, but just wanted to re-emphasize the points that Ms. Saidali and Mr. Ismat have made about the National Teachers Elected Council in Afghanistan. They are one of our member organizations, and really agreed totally about the role of the teachers' unions within that context. They are absolutely, definitely part of the solution, because as has already been said on a couple of occasions, they are all at the heart of their communities, and they have reaches within the communities which, where angels would fear to tread. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that point, that, sometimes it's forgotten, the role of the teachers' unions within communities, and they really are part of the solution. And really, that was my main point to just emphasize again.
And did you have a question?
No, I didn't have a question, I'm
Oh, okay.
afraid.
Thank you. Is there another question in the room? If not, Dr. Wahidyar, I would like to pick your thoughts on the teachers' unions, because I know at the structural technical level, we did have an issue and a challenge with not necessarily the teachers' union, but the teacher training facility, which is part of that whole teachers' conversation. The questions and the comments that you've just heard, what are your responses to that in regards to what we had, the issues that we had at the ministry?
Yeah, thank you, Ranganjan. I think one thing we need to be about is this entire issue of the teachers' union thing, because the current administration is not in any way supportive of any kind of unions. And the teacher union, actually, they are teachers within the system, which means that anything to do with those would require systems approval. And the current system is expecting them to be focused on their teaching job rather than doing other jobs than teaching. And that has been a big conflict recently between the teacher unions and the current administration. So my advice to that very moment, and to that very team at that time was that, look, instead of you becoming a tool for being pushed out of the system, stay in the system, and a time will come that you will be able to start your normal activities. So any focus on those teacher unions is going to probably eradicate some of the democratic mindset still exists within that system. That's number one. Number two, I think Palwashajan have referred to, Ranganajan, Palwashajan is English teacher of my wife. So she has a very special place in our house. She referred to other mechanisms. I think one of the very strong mechanisms that is out there and not in control or not being paid by the system is vis-a-vis teacher union is this school management shuras. We have about 13,000 school management shuras, which have elected members of every village. It has parents, and so that's an independent body that at least I have been working very closely with for the last almost a year, who have been mobilizing in doing advocacy work. There is no funding, nothing available, but all the connections that we have from the past 13, 14 years, those guys have been organizing very good gatherings in support of, I think you have seen these pictures from Paktika province, and that was organized by our school management shuras. So in so many districts and villages and provinces, both, these structures which used to have very strong women participation as well, are the only source of investment that is independent of the administration structure and can, encourage and support a positive voice for change. I think focusing more on the teacher side is going to, pinpoint to so many other colleagues that can be taken out. Rangirajan, there was one quick question that came online and the Q&A part, and that was regarding the community-based education.
If you can
colleagues,
quickly address it,
community-based
Dr. Saib,
education
we
in
are
Afghanistan.
past our time, so please be as brief
Yeah.
as you can.
Yeah, community-based education. Yeah, community-based education is one of the solution. It is not the solution. The current problem I see with all the funding coming in is that everybody is throwing resources into community-based, and I'm afraid that if that trend continues, we will have 3 classrooms for every child of grade 1 to 4 or 5, and then children from grade 6 onward will have no opportunity to learn. So I think we need to be mindful of how much scope that one solution have in education system, rather than making that the only solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saib. In fact, in our next panel, we have Dr. Jordan Naidu, who will hopefully address this issue. I know we're past our time.
Yes, which can actually go to the whole.
Okay, why don't you ask your question and then we'll take a break. What is your question, Dr. Naidu?
My question is basically drawing on what colleagues have raised. Thank you. I think a lot of the solutions, there have to be multiple solutions, but I think the issue is most of the solutions will just address small little bits and address local challenges. How do we address the challenges at scale across the whole system? And to Dr. Waidia's point, that there will have to be some kind of engagement with the authorities at some level. My question remains, and I think this is a broader discussion and not just for this session, in that engagement, while the UN and others have set certain conditions, we do know that at some level there are bargains and so on being made. So while Pavand has raised the issue about the safety and nobody wants to discuss, but we cannot have these discussions only within closed doors, noting security issues. There has to be greater transparency. So for me, there's 2 questions. One, how do we address the problem at scale? And secondly, this delicate balance between engagement, securing of rights, and security has to be confronted openly at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Naidu, and a wonderful place to end this wonderfully engaged conversation. Thank you to each and every one of the wonderful panelists for taking your time to have this wonderful conversation. We'll take a 10-minute tea break and we'll be right back with our second panel. Thank you very much. It's 10:45. We're exactly on time. If we may ask everybody to come, please take their seats, and our panelists, if you can join us at the front, please. I think we'll speak to this as well, but I'll leave this also, just whichever is coming. Yes. And I'll keep an eye, so we go until how? 2. Are you here? Oh, yeah, I have to. Until 11. So you have 1 hour and 5.
I am Jordan.
Yeah.
David, very much. Yeah, we are friends for a long time.
I just saw him in Brussels. Yeah. We know him at NEA, but I'm glad.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second part of our discussion today. My name is Iveta Silova, and I'm a faculty member in Education Policy and Evaluation and Comparative Education at Teachers College at Arizona State University, and also served there as an Associate Dean of Global Engagement. And I'm very honored to moderate the panel today with our esteemed speakers. And I will make a very short introduction before we begin the conversation on the global responses to the current challenges in Afghanistan. And as you already have seen in the previous discussion, and probably can imagine, there are already so many threads from the morning sessions that will spill over in the discussion in this session. So I'm looking forward to going deeper in some of the issues that were raised already. But let me introduce our guests first. with us in the audience today are Jordan Naidu, who is currently the Deputy Director and Chief Technical Officer at UNESCO International Institute for Educational Planning in Paris. Most recently, he was the UNESCO Director in Kabul office and country representative to Afghanistan, having retired in December 2021, but continuing to work at UNESCO. Looks like he has a very difficult time leaving. They're not letting him go. And we also have with us in the audience today, Daya Bilal Threats, who is a labor, social justice, and public education advocate, who currently serves as a senior director for education policy at the National Education Association, America's largest labor union. She's an active member of Education International, which is a global union of teacher unions. And as a policy lead for the nation's most powerful union, she oversees the association's international affairs and its policy development and advocacy arms, including international advocacy, international education policy and advocacy and support to teachers in Afghanistan as well. And online, we have Javier Luque, who is a senior education expert and Afghanistan country lead working for the Global Partnership for Education. Javier has previously served as a senior education specialist at the World Bank, senior education economist at Inter-American Development Bank, and advisor to the executive director at the International Monetary Fund. And we also are expecting Maisa Jalbou to join us very shortly. She is a recognized leader in international development and philanthropy. She was the founding CEO of the Abdullah Al Ghurer Foundation for Education and Queen Rania Foundation. She's a non-resident fellow of global economy and development at Brookings Institution and a visiting scholar and special advisor on the UN Sustainable Development Goals at MIT and ASU. So we hope that she will be able to join us shortly. But I will just do very short framing of the discussion and then give the floor to our speakers around some of the questions that we developed jointly. So the initial response of the international community to the Taliban's takeover and the collapse of the central government was to freeze all of the aid money immediately, affecting over 37 million Afghans who have remained in Afghanistan. The international development community has immediately suspended the infrastructure projects and other aid projects, and also froze the Afghan government's reserves that were held in the US bank accounts. Throughout the year, however, the United States resumed its humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, bringing to total amount of more than $720 million since August 2021. And this includes funding from the Department of State and USAID as well. But far more ambitious and perhaps unprecedented in both scope and scale is the United Nations plan to effectively take over the provision of basic services to the Afghan people, including education and healthcare, at an estimated cost of $3.4 billion. So as this international development assistance is mobilized at different levels, the question is it possible to help Afghan people without helping the Taliban? And if so, how is it possible? Are there some creative policy solutions, thinking, engagement models around the goals of international development assistance in Afghanistan that helps the people without helping the Taliban? So the practical problem then for the development industry now is not only what level of aid should be provided, but also what are the terms of engagement around international aid and international development assistance. So we will start this panel with the first question of maybe just kind of laying the ground and understanding what are the current engagement of the different organizations. So the question is, how is the international community responding to the situation in Afghanistan, especially in terms of support to education? How are the responses of the donors, policymakers, international development community members different, or how should it be different from the broad engagement in education transformation taking place globally? And maybe we will start with Dr. Jordan Naidu first, and then move to our online, one of our online participants, Javier Luque, next, and then to Daya Bilal Threats and Mesa Jalbu.
Thank you very much, Iveta. Thank you to everyone and to the organizers, Minister Mehdi, Iveta, ASU, for this event and for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and honor. I want first a disclaimer. My contribution today is in a personal capacity. So whatever I say does not reflect on UNESCO or the UN more broadly. And in some ways, while I'm supposed to be retired, I'm back working, but I still have the luxury of being able to say whatever I feel like saying, because I don't have any institutional sword hanging over me at the moment. So you can be sure that I would say some things that are some very honest truths. I think that's the first. The second, like Minister Mehdi made the comment this morning, it's not a day of celebration, but I think it's a day of reflection together as a community to find common solutions to what some may call a wicked problem. And I think that's important. The third point I want to make, I was also in Afghanistan and got evacuated on the 15th. It was a very difficult time because my birthday is actually on the 14th. So which was yesterday. And, you know, I didn't expect to get back to Afghanistan very soon. When we left the country, we went to, most of the UN staff went to Almaty, Kazakhstan, and we thought we'd be there for almost 6 months or more. But I returned to Afghanistan at the end of September. Within, you know, a few weeks, we were back in the country, and I was actually able to travel from Kabul to Bamyan, and even walked around, you know, the cliffs, had meetings with the authorities, even met a secondary school principal. So it was quite interesting. Coming back to the international response in education, I think soon after, by about September, the UN and the international actors working in country realized that they needed to come up with some kind of framework of operation. So within education, there was already some structures for coordination. The donor partner group was one, you had the cluster, and together they came together to come up with some kind of framework. There was a call to action, basically to define a few steps towards how we could still engage in the country, respecting the UN conditions in terms of the sanctions and non-engagement, particularly from a financial perspective with what was the term we were using, the de facto authorities, right? And I think that's the first point. Over the months between September to December, the ASTF, the Afghanistan Education Transitional Framework, was developed, laying out certain operating principles, which were basically the operating principles to work in a humanitarian situation defined by OCHA, which defined the kind of principles each of the actors had to abide by in engaging in country, both with local communities, with the principle of doing no harm, and at the same time, engagement with the authorities based on what was allowable within the UN framework at the time. That's the first point. Concurrently, for the broader engagement across all sectors, the UN system was also developing a new plan, which now is being revised based on the experience over the last, year. That's the second. The third point, I think, is also based on that, the cluster and the donor group came together. And over the last months, they've had a series of meetings to kind of re-engage based on the fact the funding in some ways, in real terms, as well as in terms of commitments, continued to be there. As you said, from the US alone, almost 700 million. And if we look at in actual terms from the EU, Asian Development Bank, and the US, the Norwegians continue to support the actions. We have one agency now being responsible for almost $500 million to implement in education. Now, this raises all sorts of questions about what is the nature of engagement and what are some of the bargains that are being sort of negotiated by individual agencies, even though you have a consolidated framework. And I think being privy to some information, there has been a number of donor meetings over the past months, and a critical meeting happened a couple of months ago in Doha, particularly motivated from the perspective, and Javier may say more, in terms of the GPE funding. And I'll stop there for now, and perhaps we can come back to a number of questions. One of the issues that I really think we need to talk about is the creation of parallel systems in the engagement. That's one, particularly around CBE and the distinction between development aid and humanitarian support. And I think one of the critical issues that was raised in the discussions between September and even ongoing is this nexus and trying to integrate development with humanitarian response. And in the new framework that the UN is developing and still to be finalized, I think there's some questions of, can there really be a nexus, or do you need two streams? Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Jordan, for these remarks. Let me actually first go to Javier, and then we'll turn to the speakers here. Javier, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you very well. I think you can.
Excellent. We can
me,
hear
no?
you. We can see you. Yes. So please go on.
Perfect. Thank you. First, thank you to your organizer for inviting me, and of course, as everyone has said, this is not a day to celebrate, no. But so maybe let me start briefly explaining what's GPE for those that are not fully aware of that, of what we are, what we do. So then I can explain a little bit of what's been happening in Afghanistan. Dr. Jordan has already mentioned some of the things that have happened, and I think I will complement on that from the GPE perspective. So GPE is a partnership and a fund. We are a partnership in the sense that we try to bring all our actors, partners in countries and at the global level. So at the global level, we have a board. In the board, we have representatives from the development banks, donors, countries, teacher unions, philanthropic organizations, etc. And we try to replicate that in the country. No, so in each country, we establish what we call a local education group in the generic terms. And usually this local education group, not usually, it's always the local education group is headed by the Ministry of Education. No, and of course, that was the situation in Afghanistan before the Taliban took over 1 year ago. And in Afghanistan, there were several groups, no? And I think Jordan mentioned that there was a development partner group, there was a cluster, but we also have this local education group that was like a higher level group that was the way through which we interacted with the country and we provided support to the country. And of course, on the other side, we are a fund. No, we are a fund that, based on the donations we get, we fund education. And the idea is that we provide those resources to the local education group, so the local education group can make decisions on how to, under the leadership of the government, on how to move forward. GPE has been present and supporting Afghanistan since 2011. And there has been several projects and grants. And when the crisis started, we were supporting in a pool with pool funds with IDA from the World Bank and the RTF, a program that was called ECRA, to try to support the really tried to build capacity in the Ministry of Education and supporting many areas, including construction, textbooks, teacher training. I mean, it was actually a very comprehensive program that unfortunately got to stop when in the events of last August. Since then, our first challenge was that, how we operate in a context where now there is no recognized government by all of our partner countries. No, so then we have some guidelines on how to engage in this kind of situations. And so basically what the guidelines said is the main mandates are twofold. On one side, the local education group should reconvene, but without the government till a formal mechanism to engage with the government is approved by the members of the group. And on the other side, we ask the partners that already have reconvened to elaborate what we call elaborate a plan of what they plan to do with eventually what would they like to do with our resources. No, Dr. Jordan already mentioned that. No, so partners reconvene in Afghanistan, and then they started developing the Afghanistan education sector transitional framework, and basically that framework includes the different type of actions that the donors in Afghanistan think should be done to ensure that the system keeps moving forward one way or another. Of course, the transitional framework is very broad and is supposed to be financed, of course, with GPE resources, but also with other resources. No, in a way, this should be a platform for coordination of the intervention of the different partners to avoid duplication and to make sure that things are aligned. No, so GPE announced early in March, I think, that we had $300 million available for Afghanistan. Those 300 million come from the resources of this project, the ECRA project, that were not disbursed, approximately 100 million, and 200 million come for the new allocation that Afghanistan is eligible under our new grant cycle from 2021 to 2025. And of course, so on one side, those are the resources that GP has available, and on the other side, partners have been putting their act together. No? As I said, they developed the transitional framework. They create this new group without the government. And now, as Jordan has been saying, there have been discussions on how to allocate resources, what part of the transitional framework will be financed with GP resources and what part will be financed with other partners' resources. And now they're in the process of starting finding who may be the implementers, and hopefully we'll get applications soon so we can start financing again the education sector in Afghanistan. No, and yeah, so I stopped there.
Maybe I'll have a really quick follow-up question to Javier. So in this transitional framework that you mentioned, what are some of the maybe key signposts, or maybe can you tell us just a little bit more about how that transition framework has been envisaged or defined? Transition to what, and what are some of the key signposts?
So the transition framework was developed by partners in the ground with the idea of signaling or indicating the main activities that they should be financing with resources in the very short term. And the transitional framework has a number of activities, and it includes, for example, is continued support to CVE. It mentions teacher incentives or support teacher. It mentions opportunity for teacher training, and it mentions a minor school construction related mostly to wash facilities, especially for girls. And it mentions some areas of Tibet. And I mean, again, it's pretty comprehensive, but it's, again, made with the contribution of the partners, with the idea of being a short-term platform for basically identify what they're doing and prioritizing and aligning.
Yeah, thank you so much, Javier. I would like to turn over the floor now to Daya Bilal Threats to hear more about Education International response to the situation in Afghanistan and the support to teachers.
Thanks very much. Assalamu alaikum. It's really good to be here with all of you. Thank you for having me. So I want to give this union perspective, and I want to preface what I'll say with, I'm sure what any of my colleagues would say, which is, none of the things we'll talk about here are easy to implement or do. We'll talk in sound bites because we're limited on time, but education is a complex enterprise. It's not easy here in the United States. It's certainly not easy in Afghanistan when you have competing interests in many nations and agencies all making decisions for you. And sometimes without your consultation. One of the things I really want to say here is to pick up on the last panel's conversation about really the importance of teachers' voices in education. Obviously, I represent the National Education Association, the nation's largest labor union. We are 3 million educators. And with Education International, of whom NEA is a member, the largest member of EI, one of the most important things I think we do is build the capacity for unions all over the world, teachers unions, so that they have a voice. Can you imagine if teachers were silent after this? Can you imagine where Afghanistan would be if teachers were not speaking up? So to one of the panelists in an earlier conversation talked about kind of the separation of, teaching, and really the job is not advocacy, your job is to teach. There's no way to separate those two things for an educator. It's impossible. Not a good educator. So I think one of the most important things, first and foremost, and I think both my colleagues have talked a little bit about the framework. I want to say defining the purpose of education, again, sounds so simple, and it's so easy to say that. Who gets to define education and its purpose, what its aims are? Who are the stakeholders? Who gets to make that decision? Is the local shura? Is it, the central de facto government, the central government? Once you kind of define the purpose of it, the design of it becomes obviously critical in serving the purpose, but also however you design it, you will get exactly the outcomes that you design the system to give you. So, as a union, it's not only about pay, right? And one of the roles that Education International has played very clearly here is working in concert with UNICEF to make sure teachers continue to be paid, right? So that they show up, they have a vocation, they're not lost and thrown into poverty circumstances so that they'll never be found again and leave the profession. It's very critical. I mean, it's like healthcare, right? The two national systems you don't want to lose anywhere, right? You want to make sure those two things can keep running. So the union not only advocates, obviously, for the pay and that pay go directly to the teachers and not to the de facto government or anyone else, but also the professionalization of teaching, right? We struggle with this here in the United States, frankly. The idea that anybody can teach and that you want a warm body in front of the classroom, none of these government leaders would accept that for their own children. You've got an article in The Guardian today about how the Taliban members themselves are sending their children to school, their girls to school outside of Afghanistan, right? So, it's not acceptable for them. Why is it acceptable for the rest of us? It isn't, right? So the professionalization of teaching becomes very important. How they are trained, and for what purpose? Again, the purpose of education becomes the most important thing to define and to build the system around. Who gets to have that? Who gets to define it? Who gets to build the curriculum? Who gets to train teachers? Who gets to decide who is a qualified teacher? Even that, in an instance like this, and even here in the States, becomes a very political one. You know, what teachers are trained to teach can be a very political question, depending on where you are in the world. And almost everywhere in the world, it's political, particularly when there's a woman involved. So, you know, I think that the role of the union to bring about educator voice and collective action, you see it in the streets of Afghanistan, even this weekend, is critical. It's critical to advance the progress of education in Afghanistan and all over the world. This is necessary. Education is one of the most important systems, but I think to one of our earlier speakers' comments, you know, it's almost never fully funded or adequately funded. You know, it is almost always one of the first efforts to be cut. You know, the budget is usually cut, and often, unfortunately, governments want to find the cheapest way to educate as many kids as they can, whether that's in front of a computer screen or just having a warm body in front of the classroom. And that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable in Afghanistan. It's unacceptable here in the United States. And yet we struggle with both those things. We share in that struggle. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Daya. And can I please check, because I actually don't see on my computer whether Mesa Jalbu is online right now or not. Can you check, Nazir? She's not. All right, we will continue then the discussion and maybe she will join us a little bit later. So I wanted to maybe continue the discussion to focus a little bit more on the complexities that all of the speakers have mentioned already of articulating the terms of engagement of international education assistance in Afghanistan. And especially these complexities of offering education assistance without a clear national international engagement policy or the policies that's being articulated as we speak, right? And as we engage. So there are certain types of engagement. I actually wanted to bring at least two issues as examples maybe to discuss, right? One, in the previous panel, we have heard quite a bit about the kind of the promise of digital education and online education in being able to increase access to education or scale some of the education solutions, right? And including girls' education, right? And girls' education maybe also can be discussed as a separate area. But my question is, again, thinking about the complexities, what are the implications of scaling systems that are inequitable, that actually possibly may do more harm than do good, right? So how do you scale up or increase access in education in a way that does not do more harm to either children or teachers? And you can use some other examples,
Sure.
of course.
I think this is a important question, and you know, in some ways, one of the questions you had already posed in the communication with us was in the global engagement globally across all countries, and what's the difference with the approach in Afghanistan? And I think this question reflects that, because we have this Transforming Education Summit that's coming up in New York in a few weeks' time. There was a pre-summit, and they had 5 kind of priorities: inclusion and equity, safe schools, learning skills for life and work, teachers, digital learning, and financing. And I think if we look at what Javier mentioned in terms of the ASTF, the transitional framework, it just focuses on 3. There are a number of activities that are outlined, but in the recent discussion, this is narrowed down. I think in terms of scaling up, I just want to read something from the ASTF, which actually lays out the responsibilities of both the implementing partners, the international community, and the de facto authorities. And we can see the complexity of this relationship, because can you really hold the de facto authorities to account in the current circumstances where you are not really laying out certain conditions that they have to meet, and you have no sort of, even the financing is not being used in a way as a threat. It just remains still a flow of funding. So I'll just read it because I think it's really interesting. To avoid removing accountability from local authorities to deliver basic services whilst avoiding legitimization, clear communication with the de facto authorities is essential about the proposed alternative financing modalities, including the expectation on the duration of support and the scope of activities. This approach, however, should be first agreed with donors. Individual attentions that require coordination with the de facto authorities in order to implement without impediment may be articulated without referencing the broader architecture. I think this is really a way out for many of the individual partners, because while you agree to the overall framework, you still have the freedom to make commitments and agreements as individual agencies, whether you're an NGO, a UN agency, a private sector partner. So this, I think, really is, for me, the real challenge, because there's no overall accountability under a common framework, which is supposed to be there, either from the de facto authorities or the implementing partners, even though you've agreed to these broad principles. Because even as Avia pointed out, the categories of interventions are so broad. You're going to support access because to prevent further marginalization of the most vulnerable. You're going to address quality, but the main quality intervention is training of teachers. But can you train teachers on the curriculum without engaging the authorities who are now actually changing the curriculum without people acknowledging that fact? And the third, in terms of financing, okay, you can channel 500 million through all of the partners, but it takes much more than $500 million to keep the system going. And those other resources that the authorities are spending, what are they focusing on? We are not hearing very much about that, because even teacher salaries, although it makes up the majority, the GP funds or the ATRF funds are being used, but only for a certain period. So the authorities will continue to pay teachers, and payment of teachers gives them so much more leverage over what happens. Teachers are committed to equity and so on, but they have this over their heads. So the majority of teachers, for survival, will have to follow the dictates of the current authority. And I think some of those complexities are being ignored. Even the question of girls' education, we have to continue to press on the access to secondary and higher education of girls and women. But at the same time, girls were already within the system, within primary education. Is their curriculum being narrowed, and their equitable right to education is being subsumed and subverted in many other ways? So even while they are actively in school, there's no guarantee of equity or of empowerment of girls. In fact, with the proposed changes that the ministry has, we talk about, Dr. Waidia raised the point, if their interpretation of the Islamization of the curriculum is not going to be similar to Indonesia or Malaysia, it's going to be even more extreme than the most current extreme Islamic curriculum. And that really is, for me, where we shouldn't only talk about equity for girls and women in terms of the numbers who are able to go to school.
That's a really great point. And this is exactly what I was thinking too, how digital education that often is used as a silver bullet, right, to scale up innovation, so to scale up access to education. In this particular case, I can imagine how it could be used actually to scale up indoctrination, right, to scale up scale up and reinstitute the inequities that already exist in the education system. Yeah, really, I'm so glad that you brought up some of these complexities, and I hope that we can talk about those a little bit further as well. And Daya, would you like to follow up? And then we will turn to Javier.
Sure. I think that Jordan made some wonderful points there, some really important points. Just about, what defines quality and what type of education is available to girls and to all students. I just thought he made some really good points. I'll come back on the next question.
Yeah, let's do that. So Javier, will give the floor to you now.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe just start emphasizing that in our guidelines to engage in these fragile and conflict-affected areas, one of the, I mentioned that we want to have these local education groups without the government. We ask partners to develop these plans, but one of our guiding principles, of course, is the no harm principle. No, so that's always there for us as we assess the situations and decide if we approve or not the application submitted by partners in country. But I think you were raising an excellent question that is, of course, part of the current debate of partners, how to engage in Afghanistan in a situation that most of partners cannot engage given the sanctions imposed by their governments with the Taliban. No? So, and of course that limits what can be taught with the authorities, and of course that limits how funding can flow. No, but having said that, I would say like partners, what I see partners in country, they are trying to find the best way to move forward, given the current restrictions that they have to face, and also like trying to find where can they invest, what actions can be taken, what actions is the government taking, what actions are being taken by other partners in country. No, and one of the key areas that is also in this Afghanistan education transitional framework is they have put some like monitoring and evaluation and coordination mechanisms there that in a way will help them to coordinate their actions, not in a context that there is no formal government that usually, of course, in usual context, the government takes that role. No? So in this case, partners in a way have to replicate that. In a way, it's a new role for partners, but luckily what we see is that partners are really willing to take this role, and actually they are coordinating a lot in Afghanistan. Maybe one thing to mention, I think Jordan mentioned a little bit, is that the coordination of partners in the education system is very strong in Afghanistan. It has been very strong for a while. And the UN is proposing a new structure now of coordination of aid. And like the example that they are taking for other sectors, I think there are 6 sectors, is education. So really, the way that partners are coordinating there is considered a good practice to follow. No, but again, we at GPE, of course, we are encouraging partners to coordinate and to create some monitoring mechanism, and especially so that there's no duplication. No, we may remember that Dr. Wajiyar mentioned that how many resources are coming from CBE. No, so it's clear that there has to be some strategy for those resources CBE to avoid duplication among partners. No, and so we have. We have some lines of financing. One line is one grant that we call the System Capacity Grant that can finance this type of intervention. Of course, that designs to help build capacity of the government when you can engage with the government. No? But in this case, the idea is try to help to somehow set some conditions for capacity development or future capacity development in Afghanistan, and also thinking that eventually later on we can build back better. No? I stop there.
Thank you so much, Javier. And Daya, I'll give the floor to you now.
Thanks. Thanks for letting me come back in on this. I just the phrase "do no harm" has been mentioned multiple times, and I think it is an important notion. It's also insufficient, right? That's the bare minimum, right? Is to do no harm. We're talking about the enterprise of educating and creating the future. And so, it brought to mind a couple of things. On one effort that EI, Education International, is embarking on with the Malala Fund and others, with the good help of Omar and others, is this idea of an observatory that helps better see and understand what's actually happening on the ground, so that the interventions can be surgical and precise and appropriate. And that there aren't, these vast assumptions. I thought that the assumptions that you raised were important, because that's right. You can, I gave you a book. What's in the book? Right. That's great. So understanding what's in the book, what's in the curriculum, really will get to the do no harm, right? Because education can be weaponized, and it often is. And particularly in a complex situation like this, where you've got a highly combustible environment, a very young population of childbearing youth, 70% of the population under the age of 30. I mean, their vision for themselves, for their own children, is critical to be defined in this moment, and giving them an alternative to exploitation and being recruited into military and militaristic operations is going to be critical. So I think I just really do appreciate Dr. Naidu's point. What's there, being able to see what's happening on the ground and really understanding what's in the curriculum really is just truly important.
Thank you so much.
I just want to make one comment in terms of the observatory and the importance of monitoring and evaluation. And I think here's an opportunity in some ways to really have communities involved and playing that role as the so-called policing the system in this complex environment. But one of the things I think we have to be aware of, and the colleagues from Afghanistan will be better able to speak to this, we cannot assume that all communities across the 30-odd provinces of Afghanistan, even at the village level, are all the same. You will have different centers of power. So even the shuras, the education shuras, are critical elements, but they're all not going to operate in the same way. We've had global experience on school management committees, school governing boards, and so on, and how those people within those communities with power actually can distort. So we have to really be aware where there may be with the local authorities for whatever reason, collaboration going on that can take the monitoring or the implementation in many directions. So I think there has to be multiple levels of monitoring in many different ways. And how do we get all of this together? I'm originally from South Africa, and one past life, I worked a lot on school governing bodies. And at some points, there can be the tyranny of participation. Who participates on those bodies really matters. And I think we have to be careful. We can't go there, all with rose-tinted glasses. We have to look at the complexity at every level.
Excellent points. Thank you so much. And we'll follow up on this in a few more minutes, but I wanted to welcome Mesa Jorbu, who just joined us. Thank you so much, Mesa. And you joined actually in a really critical point of our discussion, where we are talking about both the pros and the cons and the dangers of some of the solutions of the silver bullets in education, international development assistance. And you in particular have really huge expertise in digital education, among many other areas. And it would be fascinating to hear from you also, what are some of the dangers, but also some of the opportunities of using digital education to increase access of education in countries like Afghanistan. So our discussion so far has really focused on how can we scale up education or scale up access to education without harming the children, the teachers, the communities more broadly. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I apologize to my colleagues for being late. There was some confusion over the timing, but I really appreciate the points that I was able to hear, and I recognize some of the voices that have Jordan. We've connected many times over the years on this issue and others. I started working on education in Afghanistan over 2 decades ago, and so like many of my colleagues, sometimes I feel discouraged as to where we're at today, and the hopes that we had, so long ago to help the people of Afghanistan to move forward, and in particular, children and girls. So it is sort of a time of reflection, and I guess wavering is really not an option. I think when we think about innovation, we often think about digital education or online education as sort of the innovation that the go-to one, that might help us scale or address some of the challenges. And I think that's right, and we should be able to do that. We should experiment, and we should look at examples from other places. But I don't think it defines innovation. I think innovation is really what is appropriate and what is feasible in the context in education that we're working in. I mentioned that I started working almost 2 decades ago. It was a project supported by the Canadian government, training teachers, Afghan teachers in Pakistan at the time. And that was an appropriate approach and innovation that we're using then to reach a maximum number of teachers who needed consistent support. It was a blended approach. Today, I can't imagine a purely digital response to the needs of education in Afghanistan, but perhaps there are different mechanisms that can be used to blend with local community responses and supported to support broadly all the constituencies that are critical to ensuring that education moves forward. I was happy to see that we had a colleague from Education International. Teachers are at the core of what we need to be supporting. And we have not, as an international community, been doing enough to support teachers. And of course, this is not just in terms of training, this is ongoing support and ensuring that they receive their salaries and that they feel supported and connected to each other. That's really important. And there, technology can play an important role. There are some discussions taking place around how technology and how different forms of technology doesn't have to be online. In Afghanistan, for those of us who are old enough to remember, we've used radio to deliver education on nutrition. We've used all kinds of different methodologies that are just more appropriate for the context. And I think those things have to be both in support of education at the national level, formal education, as well as community school interventions. And we cannot forget that when we're talking about how the international community can support that, the education appeal that UNICEF is leading is still only half funded. Today. That's the appeal that they launched. It's the largest humanitarian appeal. Education is a core part of that. It's still not totally funded. So there's a lot that we need to do at the basic level to help them expand community access for those who do not have access to formal schooling. So in rural communities, for girls and boys where families feel that it's more appropriate for them to be learning close to home. I'll stop there, but I think this is really worth us emphasizing that innovation comes in many different forms. And certainly, there are many different avenues to engage in, and it's really, really crucial to Jordan's point is to engage the community in what those innovations look like, because sometimes they can be very, very simple.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Mazer. We have about 10 minutes to continue this discussion and then open up the floor also for the questions from the audience, both here and online. And maybe we'll cut that short. I actually wanted to ask if maybe we give the floor to each of the panelists to respond to each other, or maybe to bring up a topic or an issues that we have not yet discussed, because it is such a short time and I don't want to have us miss some of the important points, and then we can open to the audience for some of the questions, because we have questions rolling up both online, and I'm sure that the audience here has questions as well. So maybe 2-3 minutes each to maybe final thoughts, other questions for discussion that we should keep in mind.
Yeah, I have one which has been a recurring topic. We've just mentioned it over the time, but also glad to see Mesa and other colleagues, Peyman and others, even if virtually. The one issue I think which has been kind of mentioned now and again is community-based education, CBE, and I think we really have to get a better understanding of CBE. And I think Mesa's last point about CBE in terms of its purpose historically in Afghanistan and in many other places, it has served to address those who are excluded for many reasons in the most remote areas and so on, who cannot be accommodated for multiple reasons within the formal state-provided education. And I think in Afghanistan, that's been the case, not now, for a long time. Areas that were out of reach because of conflict, or the state cannot provide a school, 2 miles from the home in every case, and so on. So there's justification for it. And I think in Afghanistan, you have to be really careful on how you are defining CBE, because the majority, and it has served not more than 5% even at the height of its provision. So if you look at 10 million students, the maximum provided through CBE is not more than 200,000 if we take everybody together. That's one point. The second point, again, like I always say, we are assuming CBE is one homogeneous kind of animal, and it's not. You have like the Swedish committee CBE provision, they are more or less like formal schools. You have a whole 6 grades run with teachers who are trained through their system. You even have classes up to grade 10. But most of the other CBE are not actually schools. They are single classes in many cases, serving a very, what would I say, condensed curriculum, with the idea that often it's accelerated over 2-3 grades within 1 year, with the idea that they would transition to the government system. Today, there's little not appetite, but little absorptive capacity of the government schools so are you going to expand CBE in a way that you set up a parallel school system? So there's a whole lot of questions about that. And one of the biggest sort of focus of the funding is on CBE. But even if we put billions into CBE, the ability to expand them into kind of regular schools will take years. The one example of where kind of community-based education has really expanded is Bangladesh. But that's been a system built over years. And if you look at the schools, the BRAC schools, they are not necessarily different. The curriculum is the same as the government schools. The teachers are trained by BRAC and so on, but if you visit a BRAC school, it's very much like visiting a government school, except maybe the quality is better. Let me stop there.
That's wonderful. Daya, would you like to go next?
I think, my comments were, and questions, frankly, were really about community level as well, because you have so much variation, and at some point you have to call the question as to what is going to be the role of central government and what is going to be the role at the community level. And in a context like this, you know, it's so complex for so many reasons. You know, it's hard to answer, you know, fundamental questions like that. So, you know, I think my question, I think perhaps to you, to others that have worked in the region is, you know, how do you hear the voice and the needs of communities in an authentic way, in a way where they will give you kind of an honest reflection of what worked, you know, over the last 20 years, you know, what didn't, so that you can construct an education that's appropriate for the needs of that community, because they all have such different needs, and you want it to be aligned with some standards, right? I mean, that's where, you know, if you've determined that, you know, education is a public good, it goes back to the question of, what do you want from your system? What's the purpose of it? If you determine that it is a public good, then the government has a role. They have a responsibility to the people to ensure that it serves the public good, and that it's equitably distributed, not just accessible, but that the people who need the most get the most, all of that, right? So I'm curious, you know, from folks that have worked in the region and who have, you know, served as ministers and things like that, you know, how do you strike that balance, particularly in this context?
Such an important question. And of course, it also then goes back to the curriculum. When you talk about standards, then it also goes back to the curriculum and who defines the standards and what is it in the curriculum, and that complicates issues even further. So Javier, maybe we go to you next, and then to Mesa.
Thank you. No, maybe just to close. Of course, I hear what Jordan is saying in terms of what CBE exactly, and I mean, and all the different types of supply of CBE that currently exists in Afghanistan. But I think that that's what I'm seeing, no? And in a way where we are advocating from GPE is to, as they are encouraged, they are starting to develop this monitoring and evaluation system for the transitional framework, try to get better understanding of what's the supply of CBE, how the curriculums are similar, how the different models can complement each other, how can they learn from each other. And so again, also, I think that one of the strengths of Afghanistan is the interaction and the solidarity that is there among the members of the education community. And so I think also it's the moment not to try to look, okay, let's see how we can coordinate better on how we make CB better. No, of course, no one wants to create a parallel education system. No, and even the ones that provide CB will tell you that directly. No, but of course they came because they were responding to a need, and we are, or they are, assessing what is the future need, but definitely better coordination and better alignment with the government system is needed. No, and of course, this conversation even comes before the current crisis. No? I stop there.
Thank you so much, Javier. Mesa, over to you.
Well, I mean, it's such a complex and important issue. It's so hard to summarize in a few points, but I think, you know, my key message for today's discussion is that Afghan teachers and communities have to be at the center of this discussion. You know, I think the international community is going to need their support and to be working very closely with them to devise these strategies and to understand really what is going to work on the ground going forward. And we all know the situation is changing on a regular basis. Certainly, what is or has been feasible in the past may change today and going into the future. And I think this is a situation that requires us to work very, very closely with the education community on the ground. And that's communities, that's the teachers, and that's also increasingly Afghan youth. You know, there's a network and youth that are trying to get messages across. And today, I believe we're mostly talking about K-12, but those who are have already finished their high school education and are looking to continue their university education, are looking to continue with their research and whatnot. Those are the future leaders of the education system, of the economy in Afghanistan. We need to involve them and we need to make sure that they are engaged. And I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. This is excellent. And such a huge resonance among all of the members of the panel today in terms of engagement, community engagement, putting teachers at the front stage, and really thinking outside of the box about what the international development assistance means in this particular context. So I would like to open the floor now for questions from the audience, both here in the room and online. We have a lot of questions coming online as well, and we'll alternate. So we'll start with the audience in the room and then go online for some questions as well.
Thank you so much for the presentations and topics and everything that was discussed. Okay, sure. I'm Lida Amrola. I'm a Fulbright scholar at Texas A&M and currently doing my internship at Friends of American University of Afghanistan. I have a few questions and a point. First, don't you think that now education in Afghanistan become a means to an end? So people will go to school for 12 years just to finish it, then get to higher education. It's like a tick marks and then to get a job. So the whole purpose of developing critical thinking, love for knowledge, that is missing. We mostly think about idealization of education, best teachers, best curriculum, best infrastructure. Everything should be very perfect and idealistic. And as we can see in current times in Afghanistan, everything that we were working for the past 20 years failed because we were not nurturing and cultivating love for the education. Why graduate students from the school do not learn on themselves, they do not help their own communities? Has anyone done the survey that those who graduate from schools, from universities, how much they read on their own? How many public libraries were built by the international community, by all organizations that have spent billions of dollars? Can they point out and say, we have built 5 public libraries and encourage people to come and just read on their own? Why people are not? So education, according, I might be wrong, I don't want to education became something just a tick mark. It's not a foundation to self-learning. I can't help myself. The entire nation became dependent on the school, on the institution, on the de facto authorities, on the international community, on someone else to help them build their lives. Why, in the 12 years or 10 years of education, a student cannot find a way how to navigate, how to help themselves, how to read and access those books that can help them find their own way? Why it's so codependent? I think we're missing a very critical point of what education means. It's not just getting certificates to get a job, because getting a job is just very specific skill to do certain specialized work. The whole picture of getting to somewhere is missing. I think education is critical thinking, and it doesn't matter what kind of curriculum we have. It doesn't matter what they're trying to teach. Applied science should be the core principle. I don't think that what the Taliban or any government will be against physics, against mathematics, against certain things that are crucial. Other things we can debate for years on those issues, and we will never agree what is the best curriculum or who is the best teacher. And last part, I don't want to speak a lot. Just thinking about the notion that there is a best teacher or someone who is a calling, is good to have those teachers. But even idealizing teachers, it's already road towards a downfall. When the teacher acknowledges and say, I don't know. And they are honest to students saying, I don't know. And you are not necessarily have to even agree with me, go and study and find yourself. That will give the actual tool and empowerment to the student, that understanding that this teacher or this institution is not an answer to my problems or to all of my things in my life, but actually this teacher gives me or acknowledges me as a human being who can find the solution for my own problems. So I don't think that there will be a time where we'll have everything will be perfect. But instead we have to just cultivate and nourish the love for reading, for educating oneself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's take another question from the same table. And please introduce yourself too.
Thank you. I can introduce myself again, Palwasha Kakar from the U.S. Institute of Peace. One thing I wanted to mention is that at the U.S. Institute of Peace, we've developed a working group where we're working with religious leaders from Afghanistan and the international community and civil society organizations to think through how to respond to some of the edicts about women's rights in Afghanistan, including education, and to work on this bottom-up approach of supporting voices inside of Afghanistan with some background on Islam and how to approach these issues to be able to speak internally inside of Afghanistan. But I think there's this, in the conversation I've been hearing today, there's a number of things I wanted to raise. One is the issue of community development councils. I've been hearing in a lot of talks here in DC that there's this push to somehow fund community development councils, the CDCs, as a parallel institution. And I was wondering if there's any talk about that in the education councils that are connected to the CDCs and what that sounds like on your end of things. That's the first question. The second question is, I'm sort of hearing this disconnect between at an earlier time when we had the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and the Taliban were this insurgent movement, and they were advocating to the international community to support, their own version of education and requesting funds sort of on the back end to be able to support their education agenda at the areas that they were connecting to. And recognizing that out of the 30 ministers in Afghanistan, the Taliban ministers, 27 of them wanted education to happen and 3 of them didn't. So there's this internal dynamic, and I wonder how you are engaging with this internal dynamic of the Taliban who want education and are advocating for education, those who are not or against it, or using that as a political bargaining chip, or however it may be put. And then just lastly, the way back even in 2012, we had a meeting of women talking about what peace meant to them. And among these women, we found those who were in rural Afghanistan in the eastern areas who had negotiated locally with the Taliban to keep the girls' schools open. So we have these, should we say, frameworks, examples of communities and women who've advocated successfully to do this. Are there ways that the international community is supporting those kinds of local efforts and those local women negotiators who are doing this kind of work? Thank you.
Wonderful. So I'll open the floor to the panel, but first we'll give the microphone to Rangina.
And I'm sorry for being impatient, because I think my question is exactly to the points that 2 of my Afghan sisters have raised already. Having experienced the response of the international community at a time when we were engaged at the ministry, the very critical point that Ms. Daya, you have raised about the purpose of defining a vision of why do we want education? As a nation and as a former minister, I inherited an institution, a very large institution without a vision. Nobody knew at the Ministry of Education why we were educating millions of children in Afghanistan. And in order to define that vision, we needed to define the purpose of why are we educating our children. But interestingly enough, the response of the international partners on the ground was not very supportive of that effort. Perhaps part of the problem was the way we communicated or lack of communication to them. But so that was an interesting experience. And then the point that Palwasha Jan made, that even when the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was intact and in place, certain multilateral organizations actually signed direct agreements with the Taliban in Doha to support education while the Ministry of Education was still operating. And this is no science, this is a fact that we all now know. So with that, the questions that they've both raised and the experience that we've lived and the fear that we fear right now of creating and investing in parallel structures on the ground, where is the international community actually going with its investment in the education sector?
Excellent. So let us give maybe would you like to just add to this question? Or let's hear some answers from our panel first.
With those online.
Jordan suggests we start with those online. So Javier and Maisa, it's over to you.
Get out of answering the most difficult question.
These are excellent questions, hard ones. Maisa or Javier, would one of you like to start answering any of the questions?
I am going to defer to Javier because he represents an international organization that's working in the space. I think that many of these issues that were raised are questions that need debate and need discussion. And I think that they're very well taken, in particular from our sisters from Afghanistan who have lived experience and of course are asking very valid questions that are relevant in the context of Afghanistan and in many other places. What is the purpose of education? And you know, what is ultimately the hope of the people and the country. I just wanted to speak to the point of working with women. There was a point raised about women who were actually facilitating or negotiating access to education. And I wonder if this isn't, again, yet a point that we really need to underscore. You know, I mentioned communities broadly, but working with women, working with girls even themselves and with teachers. Again, I come back to this point. You know, short-term strategies versus long-term strategies. How do we straddle between the two of those? We are in a situation where we're back to, again, an emergency, a humanitarian type of response in education at this point in time. That's a little different to the long-term development plan. And of course, they have to both connect and they have to make sense to each other. But I think our immediate priority now is to make sure that we get as many children back into school as possible with whatever means we are able to access. I mean, we cannot afford to have these children, and in particular girls. There's over 3 million of them who are out of school. This needs to be our primary focus. While we continue to work on the international community support and the coordination and the longer term plan. This is my perspective on it, and perhaps my colleagues will also have more to say.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for going first, Mesa, and giving space for others to think a little bit and formulate responses as well. Jordan, you're ready?
Yeah, I think, you know, just to the questions, I think the first question is basically a comment in a sense that we can't argue with. It's, you know, that's what it is. That's the challenge we face in education globally. You know, to what extent it's for you know, this instrumental approach versus really producing critical thinkers. And most education systems, nobody really wants critical thinkers. You're going to overthrow that government. So, you know, I think that's a challenge globally. But to the questions raised from the colleague from US Institute for Peace, I think one of the challenges historically for the international community, and this is both in Afghanistan and elsewhere, we often read the signs wrong because it's who we engage with in the country. So even the community interaction, most international actors are not on the ground ever. You know, you often deal working through a third party, often an NGO, well established. And in that NGO, usually it's English speaking colleagues who have, I don't want to be critical, but some kind of vested interest. So they will feed whatever messages they want to. The very few organizations are actually international, are situated within communities. We don't work with community-based organizations. We're often working with the national NGO, whether it's education, health, and so on. So I think the picture we get is very distorted. At the same time, I think one of the challenges as we re-engage, we do have to work with communities directly or through intermediaries, but there has to be a very different kind of multiple pronged approach. And one of the things we do, and I agree with Mesa, that the right to education is critical, but at what cost? Yeah. I think that's a question we haven't given enough reflection to, and I don't mean financial cost. It's the greater human cost in terms of overall development of Afghanistan. The second issue, I think, in the community engagement that we have to confront, even as we empower communities and so on, we don't want to put them at greater risk, right? So how do we do it in a collective way that addresses both their ability to move forward? And in one question there, as we provide community, I'm not against community-based school. I went to community-based school in my early grades. So, you know, it does build education opportunity for the most marginalized. But what I think we need to do as we work with communities and provide the services, work collectively as partners, but we also have to continue to ensure that they continue to hold the authorities to account, because even as we provide extra services in these humanitarian contexts, the de facto authorities have an obligation as the state to provide certain things. And by providing things in a way that substitutes, there's a danger that they will see it as a way out. So even as we address the humanitarian crisis and provide access, what measures can communities take, however, by themselves, but with support from all actors, to actually not let the authorities abrogate their state responsibility, because they are at the moment the controllers of the state.
Thank you so much, Jordan. I would like to really quickly, actually, Javier, did you have a response for here as well? Okay, and then I will have a question from the online audience. I have one waiting for Daya specifically. Javier, go ahead.
Basically my point here will be like what's happening. I mean, the World Bank had this recent report on what they're saying, oh, is education fulfilling its promise or not? No, and they did also some work in Afghanistan as part of some service delivery assessment in the education sector, no, and they found like the levels of learning in Afghanistan were extremely low, no. And actually, they found something quite interesting, even though they put some caveats on that. That is that the CBE schools that they assess in that learning assessment actually were better than the public system. No, but I think that the point here is that if we have to make sure that kids when go to school learn, not that the quality of the service provided that we are bringing. No, so and that's part of our for like trying, like when they're saying, oh, let's try to CBE models, talk to each other, improve on each other, learn from each other, and somehow also bring that culture to the public education system. No, so if kids go to school but they don't learn, the frustrations of the type that we were hearing before, of course, are going to keep arising, and actually could promote in a way school students to drop out earlier, things like that, because they just go to school and don't learn. No, and all the costs that involves going to school is definitely not paying for them and for the country and for the international community. Stop there.
Thank you so much. We now have a question for Daya from the online audience. And Anne, can you please let the Paivan speak?
Hello.
Hello, we hear
actually,
you.
This isn't. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Actually, this isn't a question. I just wanted to quickly touch on a few points, if that's allowed, with just a couple kind of updates, I guess, from what's happening here on the ground. But actually, to go back a bit, just to clarify and bring a few points together regarding CBE. I agree with Dr. Wahidyar that if we keep expanding grade 1 to 3, even grade 1 to 6, with the idea that that's what CBE is, we're still not we're not addressing we're not breaking the cycles of poverty as we aim to do with education. And the important thing to remember, but I think we all forget because it was so recent, in 2019, the CBE policy was revised to allow up to grade 12 in communities. And this is critical for girls especially who will probably never be able to walk to a hub school. And it was BRAC that for the first time was trialing a few different modalities at a very cost-effective price, getting about 10,000 girls for the first time in school through grade 12. Those girls were set to graduate in November of 21. The funding for that was cut in August of 2021 by the US and UK. So this idea, the efforts to harmonize CBE, alternative systems in general, take it to grade 12, honor the community model, was well in place. Dr. Wahidyar, you were a lead on it. And this is one of the tragedies that is cut short. So while the international community is funding CBE, again, that's 200,000 students, okay, but most of the 6.5 million were in CBE catchment areas. And again, the quality points Javier brings up, it's invested teachers. They didn't buy their position in the marketplace. They avoided corruption, 1 to 30 instead of 1 to 70 students. There is a lot to learn from CBE in the government system. But one other thing to say, and going back to the very beginning, and Omar talking about getting to the bottom of the thread, the beginning of the thread, and Maisa and others' point about women-led groups and working with communities, I think the international community has understood this. They don't have access to the true power holders. The minister himself hung his head on March 23rd and said, and did not want the school ban to continue. We have an unseen leader holding girls' education hostage or as a negotiation point. This is political. And without the ability to negotiate at the right level, it doesn't matter how many are sympathetic. We need to talk to the people who are the power holders, and we can't. So that has put us to civil society. Just last week, 20 million was announced to support over 300 women-led, women-focused civil society organizations in all 34 provinces. UNDP has another fund. EU is doing a mapping. So I think that direction is moving forward with the international community kind of throwing up their hands and saying, we don't have the political power to negotiate. We have to put it into the hands of the people, which is kind of a beautiful thing to see.
Oh, no.
No, I was done. I was done.
Oh, you were done.
It's a beautiful thing to see. What you guys are envisioning and suggesting is happening. There seems to be some kind of collective understanding that this is the way forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And did you also have a question for Daya about the teacher unions on the ground?
Yes,
teacher unions here in the US, teacher union in the US.
I'm so sorry. I just thought, given the point that this really the face-off is between the US and Afghanistan. The NEA is an incredibly powerful organizing entity. Is there something that the teachers union in the US can do to push the government to understand the urgency of funding education in Afghanistan, releasing assets if that's necessary?
Thanks for the question. I don't know if it's possible for us to have an effect, but we're certainly willing to go back at it and try to restart those conversations. You know, I think the latest drone strike and finding Zawahiri there, I think did set the U.S. back in terms of its plans to engage the de facto leadership, and I think it really did destroy what grain of optimism and trust may have been there. But we'll see. I do think that it's worth revisiting that conversation with the US government. And I'm happy to talk with you and other partners further about how to best do that.
Wonderful. Thank
We'll
you so
reach out.
much.
Yeah. Good.
So I think we are running out of time and actually behind the schedule a little bit already. And we have some delicious Afghan food waiting for us as well. And so we maybe will move into some of the closing remarks at this stage and we'll wrap up this panel. So first of all, I would like to thank all of the panelists for sharing their insights on the current state of affairs, especially with regard to the global response to Afghanistan and international development assistance. I know that we have not answered all of the questions, but I would like to propose that some of these questions we also take up during lunch and continue the conversation. And we also have a plan to continue the conversation in an online space. And Rangina and Omar will share a little bit more about those plans. But maybe on this note, I would like to thank the panelists for being here and for sharing their insights. Thank you. And I'll give the microphone to Rangina and Omar now for the closing remarks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for everybody's patience. Indeed, a very engaging, very informative, and exactly the kind of conversation that we wanted to have with this forum. And I want to personally add that I've witnessed and participated in a lot of conversations over the past year, particularly after the Taliban did not keep their promise of opening girls' schools on March 23rd, 2022. One difference that I've noticed, and I'm not being biased because I've helped organize this, but one of the intentional purpose in organizing this level of a conversation was to go to the deep roots of the problems and the issues that education is engaged with or faced with. It is great to hear anecdotal, emotional stories and pleas and advocacy for education because we all know it's a good thing. But I think we've been hearing too much of that and too less of the critical issues that we hope that this forum will help to start. And with that, I'll give it to Mr. Karga to share with you what we hope to do moving forwards.
Well, first of all, thank you all for participating. And to the panelists for a very engaging discussion. And I think we can all agree that this is sort of the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of questions that we still need to discuss, think about, and figure out how to respond to. I wanted to give 3 thoughts based on what we have heard and suggest a way to move forward with this dialogue. The first is that I think throughout the panels and the questions, the idea of defining what the purpose of education is extremely important. And that goes back to the roots of why we're educating people and coming to some agreement and what it is that we're trying to achieve. And the UN General Assembly on transformation of education is a key area of this discussion, and Brookings is taking a lead role in discussing why we are educating people and how we can transform our educational landscape to meet that purpose. Number 2, a takeaway for me has been this discussion between global and the local. One of the questions in this area is engagement. We're talking about CBE, we're talking about digital communication, but I think one of the future discussions that we need to really delve into is how are we engaging in this process with whether we're calling it de facto government or the government in power right now. And this transition framework, what are we transitioning to? I think that is a key question that we have to address. And then how do we take programming and scaling it with purpose? Again, this is an area that at Brookings we're deeply involved in and thinking about. How do we scale something that doesn't cause more harm? And we want access, but if that access is going to create more problems down the road and weaponize education again, or at least give the perception of weaponization of education, how do we maneuver in this environment to go forward? So I think those are all questions that need to be addressed. And this is the beginning of that conversation. And ASU with Brookings is planning to continue this conversation and have another panel to keep a pulse on these fundamental questions about education in Afghanistan, to serve as a third party. That observations and discussions are extremely important to continue that. So those were my general thoughts, and I'll let Iveta.
Actually, I would like to give the floor to Rangina because I really don't have. I would rather have her speak.
Well, I have to thank both Iveta and Anne, our incredible colleague, who has just been doing all the great things for making this happen. In fact, you know, when I first came back to America, not exactly a year ago, but about a year ago, I had this sense of responsibility of what now? I've been forced to leave an incredible journey that we had started together to move mountains, really. And as Omar rightfully say, if we just had 2 more years, the kind of agenda that we had introduced, the kind of strategy that we were trying to implement, the plan, it really would have become a model of a country such as Afghanistan to look at for other nations in conflict that could have learned from us. But unfortunately, plans from above were different. And so since I've come and joined Thunderbird and ASU, meeting Iveta was that beginning point of saying, well, yes, you can continue, and let's continue. So thank you for taking on our journey, because this is our way of continuing the reform agenda for education in Afghanistan that we started, that did not get completed or even close to completion. But the ability to have, as a collective body of international experts, local experts, people who have not just the knowledge, but the practical ways of how to do things, how to get things done as a network and as a platform for Afghanistan moving forward, and serving as a pulse on the progress of education. I think this could be an incredible opportunity for all of us to work together, to remain connected and engage with each other, not only to update each other on the progress, but then also serve that engagement and the knowledge that we gain as a pressure point for policymakers, for donors, for not necessarily being the monitoring agents on the ground, because we're not, but figuring out what are the best mechanisms and ways of making sure that what donors are pledging to and what policymakers are committing to, how is it actually implemented on the ground? So with that, I think, yes.
I actually have one other thing too, on the technical note to add that, so we are planning every half year to hold in-person gatherings like this, just as we mentioned before, to keep the finger on the pulse on education in Afghanistan, but also creating an online space where we can share some of the updates and perspectives and insights and exchange ideas and experiences on what is happening. So be on the lookout for that, and we will be in touch with more details. And we do have a short closing remarks that were recorded by the Dean of Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University, Carol Bazile.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Basile. I'm the Dean of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I want to thank all of our panelists today for their insightful and thoughtful comments. These are very difficult socio-political issues that we're dealing with that will take all of us sitting at the table to solve. I especially want to applaud Rangina for her bravery and courage. The situation in Afghanistan is complex, to say the least, and only time will tell how life there will move forward. We can only hope that the legacy that Rangina and others have left may still be realized, and the fight for equity and education for all will come to fruition. On behalf of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College and Arizona State University, we appreciate those that participated today and encourage more dialogue that defies the challenges, seeks solutions, and speaks for those without voice. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Carol Basile. I'm the Dean of the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. I want to thank all of our panelists today for their insight.
Okay, so food, it is, we wanted to give a touch of Afghanistan, or we wanted to bring Afghanistan in spirit and every aspect that we could. So we brought food from Bamiyan restaurant, which is I don't work for them. I'm not promoting them, but they are one of the best Afghan food providers in the area. And Anne has been incredibly good with them to make sure that we get our food in time. And so they delivered. So kudos to them. Thank you. Enjoy the food. Stay in touch. We will be in touch with you. And we want to have this conversation many, many more times until we can collectively figure out the way forward. So thank you again for your time and have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody for joining us online as well. You are with us in spirit as we eat. Wow.